Then let's do the darn thing, folks. Quick little recap. We are right in the nitty gritty of agency discussions and understanding kind of the common law of agency and those fiduciary duties that we owe our clients. And of course, explaining how your brains have to understand and interpret agency and everything in between. So let me just kind of quiz you on some of the things we've talked about. What do we call the people who hire us?
Client, principal.
Client slash principal. Those are synonyms. They mean the exact same thing, right? Client slash principal. And what do we call everybody else? Customers. Okay. And what do we say that we owe clients? What was the mnemonic we used?
Obedience.
Well, that's just one piece of it. Old car. There you go. Old car is the mnemonic, and that is obedience, loyalty, disclosure, confidentiality, accounting, and reasonable skill and care. We owe all those things to clients under the common law of agency. And then, of course, what did we say we owe customers? Next to nothing, but not nothing. There you go, Bree. There's one of them. Fairness. There's another one. Honesty. And there's one last thing we technically owe them. What is it? Material facts. There you go, Paige. Material facts, because we owe everybody in the club getting tipsy material facts. Okay, it doesn't matter if they're our client, our customer, doesn't matter if it's a buyer or seller, we owe everybody material facts. And so customers get honesty and fairness and disclosure of material facts. And the honesty and fairness piece is rather laughable. At the end of the day, the honesty and fairness piece is we will screw you over if you give us an opportunity. We've got to point blank period tell them that. You're going to realize that tonight, whatever you want to call it. So then we also talked about tiers of authority in an agent relationship. And what were the classifications of those tiers of authority in an agent relationship?
Universal, general, and special.
There you go. Universal, general, and special. And if we're dealing with sales transactions in the real estate world, which capacity are you typically operating in? Special. Very limited, right? You are an advisor, cannot make any decisions on behalf of anybody in any way, shape, and form. And then, of course, what did we say would be some examples of general agency? Property manager and?
A real estate licensee to their firm.
There you go. A real estate licensee acting on behalf of their firm, because we can bind them to agency agreements. Because remember, the firm is the agent, but we are going to be signing them as the subagent. So we can bind them to them, just like a property manager could bind the property owner, the landlord, to certain things like lease agreements and repair work and things of that nature. And then, of course, universal agency, unlimited power, is not something we typically need in the real estate brokerage world. Okay, one last recap before we jump back into this, folks. If I say listing agent, who do you work for?
Seller.
The seller. If I say seller's agent, who do you work for? Still the seller. If I say buyer's agent, who do you work for? Buyer. And if I say selling agent, who do you work for? There you go, Paige. Don't know. You don't know. You don't know. Selling is a dangerous word. A selling agent just means you brought the buyer, because remember, we haven't sold anything until there's a buyer, right? Listing is the act of marketing the property for sale on behalf of the seller. but nothing is sold until you brought the buyer. But it never, ever, 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 ever dictates loyalties, right? Selling means you're assisting a buyer, you brought the buyer, you're working with the buyer. Doesn't mean you're working for the buyer. So if we were telling you selling agent, it's never going to tell you where your loyalties lie. What else is probably going to be in the question to tell you where your loyalties lie?
Customer or client.
There you go. That word customer or client, folks, you've got to train your brain to understand how critically important those words are. Because if you see the word customer, that automatically tells you that's not our person. And if you see the word client, that automatically tells you that is our person. You've got to be very, very careful. Okay, selling is the dangerous word. Now, folks, when we get into later today some commission math, there's going to be some math tonight. We're always going to talk about the commissions between the listing firm and the selling firm. Folks, in commission math questions, we don't really care where your loyalties lie. It's just do the stinking math, right? So the selling firm is the firm that got paid for bringing the buyer. Doesn't necessarily mean they represented them. And in that kind of question, it's a moot point. Who cares? Just know who got the money. But of course, some questions are going to be about loyalties and whom represented who and so on and so forth. So we left off here where we started talking about representation, right? And when we're dealing with buyer agency, folks, if I say buyer agency, if the test says buyer agency, that means that the only person we care about is the buyer, right? That's where we left off. The only person we care about is the buyer. That doesn't tell us that the seller is or is not represented, but they're not represented by us, so we just don't care, right? And so if I work for ABC Realty and Raphael is my buyer client, and then we've got Lena, who's a seller being represented by XYZ Realty, Lena is still just a customer to me, right? She's not my person. It doesn't mean that the other party is not represented. It just means we don't care about them in any way, shape, and form. Everybody understanding this single agency piece? Buyer agency means we only care about the buyer. We don't care about the seller at all. Seller could be represented by a broker. They could be unrepresented. Either way, we don't care about them. They're not our person. So this is neat and clean in the sense that we know exactly where our loyalties lie. And there's no muddying the water. There's no confusion. So when you see buyer agency, we only care about the buyer. No ifs, ands, buts, or coconuts. Now, the other thing that I've warned you time and time again about is do not listen to any of this NAR crap that is happening in the actual real estate world. If you know anything about it, no, you don't. Stop it. Because oral buyer agent, Jack, I'm looking at you. Oral buyer agency. You got to put buyer agency after we had this conversation. Oral buyer agency agreements are legal in North Carolina. Very testable aspect of them, folks. They still have to be express. Okay, still have to be express. What does express mean?
Written.
No. Stated. Stated. It just, remember I told you, let me express my disappointment. Let me express how mad I am. Let me express how upset this made me. I'm going to tell you. I'm going to make you aware of it. And so I can make you aware with words, or I could write it down on paper. Either way, I'm making you aware. And so if I was to give you a test question, listen carefully, that said, which of the following is true about oral buyer agency agreements? And one of the answer choices was must have discussed compensation and must have discussed whether or not dual agency can be performed. That's going to be true because it's not just let's go see pretty houses. Let's go see pretty houses would be an implied agreement. And I told you North Carolina does not recognize implied agency agreements. So we would have to clearly state how we're going to work together, when it would have to be reduced to writing, how we expect to be compensated, whether or not we can do dual agency. We've got to actually express it to you. We've got to make them aware of it. Now, the other thing, and you're going to see this a couple times throughout the slides, also very testable in the North Carolina test, there are two things that oral buyer agency agreements always have to be, okay? And that is non-exclusive and open-ended. Okay, non-exclusive and open-ended. What does non-exclusive mean?
They can work with
Right.
several agents.
There you go. So if Donna calls me up and she wants to see a house, and legally speaking, right, I meet Donna. We're going to get into something in a second called the Working with Real Estate Agents disclosure. I'm going to explain to her how agency works first and foremost. But after that, I'm going to ask her if I can be her buyer's agent, because we want to form this relationship. And we have to have a relationship. Folks, you've got to represent somebody in North Carolina. And so it's either the buyer or the seller or both. And so I'm going to say, well, Donna, hey, listen, we can have a written buyer agency agreement to start off, but if that makes you uncomfortable, we can start off with an oral buyer agency agreement. And it is non-exclusive and open-ended. Non-exclusive means I'm not restricting Donna to only work with me. Remember that dating analogy we gave you at the end of class last week? Donna and I are dating in this brokerage relationships. We're seeing if we vibe, if we want to work together. And if we don't, folks, she can just ghost me, right? Because I've not bound her to me. She can cancel anytime. And the open-ended piece of it is there's no period of time. It's not like, okay, Donna, we're committed for 3 weeks. No, we're not committed at all. She can work with as many other people as she wants to, even when we have an oral buyer agency agreement. And she can cancel anytime she wants to in this oral buyer agency agreement. So I'm going to say it again. Oral buyer agency agreements are always non-exclusive. And they are always not associated with any period of time. You're not allowed to put a time frame on this in any way, shape, and form. Now, the other thing that you have to understand, and will come up again, but I'll just go ahead and mention it now, is that you cannot get to closing in North Carolina with an oral buyer agency agreement. The way that the rule was written, it states that you would have to reduce it to writing prior to the time you make an offer on behalf of them. So Donna and I could go see 500 houses with an oral buyer agency agreement, but the second she wants to see one, we have to reduce it to a written buyer agency agreement for me to legally put that offer in on behalf of her as her buyer's agent. Genesis, so can they charge for during that time that they weren't exclusive? We're not typically charging you anything until we get to closing. I'm not going to say we can't. You're going to see there is something out there, but it's going to be very hard to charge somebody anything during a non-committal relationship like this oral buyer agency agreement. And that'll make more sense in a second. Also understand, folks, that the only oral agency agreements that can be legally done in North Carolina is technically tenants, but that's not going to be testable, but buyer agency. There is no such thing as oral listing agreements. There is no such thing as oral property management agreements. All other agreements have to be in writing from the offset. Buyer agency agreements are really the only ones that can be oral. And as I said, you cannot get to closing that way because you have to reduce it to writing prior to making an offer. Genesis says the reason she asked because someone last week shared that someone tried to charge them for 3 weeks. You're talking about in the class somebody shared that? You're talking about Janet then, right? Where she had like they tried to say that she owed them money, but without an actual agreement in place, they didn't. So not really going to go well. So when we're dealing with buyer agency, okay, I'm going to say it again. If I say buyer agency, that means we only care about the buyer. So that means we don't care about the seller. The seller could be unrepresented or the seller could be represented by another firm. Either way, we don't care. And so this means that there is no conflict of interest. Our loyalties are with one client and one client only, which, like I said, makes it very straightforward. We know where our loyalties lie. We know who we're looking out for, so on and so forth. Now, folks, this last note here says rules out in-house sale of listings. You have to understand that everything is dependent on the firm. Okay. And so if I'm telling you who is, by the way, you tell me, who is the agent? The firm. And so you understand the confusion here, right? If we say buyer agency, that means that the only person the firm cares about is the buyer, which means that this buyer we're representing could not be looking at a property that was listed by our firm, because that would no longer be just buyer agency. Because if the firm cares about both the buyer and the seller, what do you think we call that?
Dual agency.
Dual agency. And that's what I'm telling you. If we say buyer agency, you only care about the buyer. If we say seller agency, you only care about the seller. If we care about both, we don't just call it, we can't call it buyer or seller agency. We call it dual agency. So the literal definition of dual agency is when the firm is representing the buyer and the seller in the same transaction. You need to repeat that in your head. The definition of dual agency is when the firm represents the buyer and the seller in the same transaction. What you got, Janet?
So when you become a dual agency, do you get double commission?
Don't worry about the money. The answer will never be about the money on the test, and your job right now is to focus on the test. It's a good question, though. The firm doesn't necessarily mean you. You'll see what I mean in a moment. So here's where I was just going some of these things about oral buyer agency. Okay, oral buyer agency is legal. Oral buyer agency is legal. Always non-exclusive, always open-ended, right? No period of time. Has to be reduced to writing prior to presentation or making an offer on behalf of the buyer. And of course, you need to have given them what we call a working with a real estate agent's disclosure. We're going to talk about that tonight. It is a disclosure to make them aware of how agency works so they can make good, adequate decisions.
So is that still oral, or is this?
Yeah, all this is still oral.
But that's not the written part that we need.
No, you're talking about the bottom note there?
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm going to really make sure I beat this in your heads in just a second, but listen to me very carefully. The working with real estate agents, that's what WWREA stands for. We love our acronyms. The working with real estate agents disclosure, listen to me. Never, ever, 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 never, ever, 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 never, never creates an agency relationship. Never. It is a disclosure only. Here's how it works. It never creates a relationship. So you got to be very careful. All we did was disclose to them in writing how it works, but that didn't form a relationship with them. The relationship was formed orally. What you got, Lena?
That disclosure form, would that be for buyers and sellers though?
Yes.
For all your clients?
Yes. Yeah, we're going to talk about it in great detail in just a moment. Now, here's the thing, and this is where I'll go down a little bit of a tangent because they're asking about this working with real estate agents disclosure. The disclosure we're going to discuss in depth, but let me tell you one of the most common mistakes that students make day in and day out on the test for this working with real estate agents disclosure. It is required in all sales transactions. Sales transactions. That means somebody is buying and selling. Folks, do you think that in real estate land we do transactions other than sales? I'm waiting for the heads to reach a consensus because they're like, there you go, Jack. Property management is not sales. Nobody is buying or selling. And so, folks, you've got to be careful. Listen to me. I told you there are very few absolutes in the real estate world. Think about this. If I said the working with real estate agents disclosure is required in all transactions, is that a true statement? No, because all is an absolute. You just told me not all of our transactions are sales transactions. I can't tell you how often students get that question wrong. Folks, I'm literally telling you a question that's on your test right here, right now. Which of the following is true in regard to the working with real estate agents disclosure? Two of the answer choices. It's required at first substantial contact in all sales transactions. That's true. It's required in all transactions. That's not true. That is not true. You see, that one word makes all the difference. Sales makes it right. All, no. Everybody with me? So we're going to get into the working with real estate agents disclosure in great detail, but here's what you're going to find is going to happen. I'm going to teach you agency in great detail, and then when I show you the working with real estate agents disclosure, you're going to be like, oh my God, this sounds like exactly what Seth taught us about agency. And you're going to come full circle. It's how this happens. Now, one word of caution, and I'm going to say this time and time again because this is a very confusing, testable aspect from a North Carolina point of view. When you're dealing with agency disclosure, I said it, but I haven't taught it to you yet. You have to give people the working with real estate agents disclosure at what we call first substantial contact in all sales transactions. But I want you to realize something. On my slide right here, this language says initial contact. Folks, there's a difference there. First substantial contact, I'm going to go ahead and summate it for you. It's when somebody starts to talk about confidential stuff. We typically break it into PTM, price, terms, motivation. If the conversation goes confidential, that's first substantial contact. That's the deadline in all sales transactions to give people the working on the real estate agent's disclosure. And so if you, very specific here, are a buyer's agent and you are reaching out to a seller or a seller's agent and talking to them, you would have to disclose your agency status at initial contact. Why? Think about it. Bree, it was terms.
Formally representing the buyer.
Because you're formally representing the buyer. And that matters why?
Legally, you're acting as a representative.
Mm-hmm. I mean, you're not wrong. I just need, no, it's not so you can get paid.
Anything they say can be material fact to your client.
Let's not say material fact, but yes, absolutely. Anything they say can and will be used against them, right? And so here's the thing you have to understand, folks. They're on opposite ends of the playing field. And so you've got to let them know we're not on the same team. And so I want you to think back to the story time I gave you last week. Remember what I told you. Once upon a time, buyer agency wasn't a thing. Who did I tell you that everybody represented? The seller. Even in two different brokerage firms, ABC Realty was a listing agent and XYZ could find an unrepresented buyer, and that would be what we called cooperating seller subagency. Two firms cooperating, but really they were all loyal to the seller. And so because there's this potential for them to be on the same team, they could legally be on the same team, we have to tell them at initial contact, we're not on the same team. Does that make sense? It wouldn't be fair to try to trick them and make them think we're on the same team when we're not. Is everybody with me? And I'm going to give you a bunch of scenarios to help you understand this in just a minute. So only a buyer's agent, right? You already have an agency agreement with a buyer and you are reaching out to a seller or a seller's agent, you would have to disclose your agency status at initial contact. In every other sales relationship possible, it's for substantial contact. So let me ask you a question. Brenda has an oral buyer agency agreement with Tom. They look at 20 properties over the course of 2 weeks. Tom eventually makes an offer on one of the homes. However, he has his cousin Earl from Spivey's Corner, North Carolina, write the offer for him. What could Brenda do about this?
Nothing.
I mean, Tara and Bill have an opinion. The rest of y'all just like waiting. Nothing.
Does it depend on whether or not his cousin has an actual written agreement allowing him to make the offer?
Well, in this context, just assume he does. I mean, you can't speculate on what is or what isn't. The only thing you know is that they had an oral agreement, which means, as some of you have concluded, it was non-binding. Okay, it was non-exclusive. It was open-ended. They can cancel any time. What can she do about it? Nothing. Because you can't force anybody into anything with an oral buyer agency agreement. Non-exclusive, open-ended. So when we're talking about single agency, let me paint a picture for you, folks. I've already explained to you. If I say buyer agency, that is single agency, right? Because the only person we care about is the buyer, and we don't care about anybody else. Well, let me ask you this. Do you think there are firms that only work with buyers? There are. There are firms that only work with buyers, which means those firms will only ever have single agency. There is no chance of them being anything other than buyer agents because they don't work with sellers. Do you think there are firms that only work with sellers? Yeah. Which means those firms could never have anything other than single agency because the only people they will ever represent is the seller. So let me paint a picture for you here, folks. Okay. I work for ABC Realty. Get me. Oh, that's not going to work. That's white. I work for ABC Realty. I'm just going to put ABC. And our firm works with sellers only. Okay. We do not represent buyers. And so I have a seller and I have listed 123 Main Street. And as it is listed, I've got my sign in the yard. I'm marketing it for sale, all that fun-filled jazz. And Cheyenne picks up the phone and calls me. She sees my sign one day and she calls me up and she says, Seth, this is a beautiful home. I'd like to see it. Am I going to show this home to Cheyenne? Got some differentiating opinions here. Let me help you out. Am I going to show this home to Cheyenne? Absolutely, I am. Folks, this is a very important lesson I just gave you. We don't work for buyers. We only work for sellers. But what is my job as the listing agent? Summarize it for me. Make it simple. What's my job? Sell the stinking house, right? If I'm not going to show it to a potential buyer, am I really doing a good job of selling this house? Folks, understand the difference here. I didn't ask if I was going to work for Cheyenne. I said, am I going to show her the house? Yes. I will show Cheyenne the house, and as you just said in the chat, Cheyenne will be an unrepresented buyer. She is a customer. My loyalties are exclusive with the seller, aka single agency. Do not confuse single agency with you will never be assisting the other side, that you'll never be talking to the other side. Remember the Best Buy analogy. Every single person who works at Best Buy is going to be assisting you. But they don't work for you, they work for Best Buy. So everybody with me here? So it could be single agency where we only work with sellers. It could be single agency where we only work with buyers. And folks, even in firms that work with both, if we're only representing one in the transaction, it's still single agency because we don't care about the other party. That's what it comes down to. Doesn't mean we won't interact with that party. Think about it. Let's change this up a little bit. I'll keep the same people. ABC Realty. But we only work with buyers. And now Cheyenne, I'm just going to put Shy. Cheyenne is my buyer. I'm representing her. And she wants to see 123 Main Street, but 123 Main Street is a for sale by owner. Well, folks, how do you think that I'm going to schedule a showing for Cheyenne to see this for sale by owner?
Going directly with the owner?
There you go. And so yet again, understand this. Who is my client? Cheyenne, right? Now my firm only works with buyers. Cheyenne is my buyer client. But yet again, here we are. I'm interacting with a seller, folks. It is okay to interact with somebody that's not our person. We do it all day, every day. But just understand that that doesn't make them my person. Yes, I called them. Yes, I scheduled the showing. Yes, I may even tell them some things they need to do to make the transaction go forward, but I'm never looking after them. They're not my person. Is this making sense? So when I say single agency, I represent the buyer or the seller, and the other person could be unrepresented. They could be represented. I don't care. They're just not my person. I may interact with them. Doesn't make me loyal to them. Let me go back to Bill's question. So it's legal to have an unrepresented buyer? Absolutely legal. Remember the analogy that I gave you for agency. Folks, an attorney is technically an agent. Can you represent yourself in court without an attorney? Yeah. It's stupid, but you can do it. Same thing's true here. As long as you Mirandize them and explain to them it's stupid, people can be unrepresented, and it's no problem at all. We just have to make sure that we comply with all agency disclosure laws. And as long as we've done that, no harm, no foul, right? Sergio, when you mean get credit, do you mean am I getting paid? Is that what you mean? It's negotiable. Of course, that would be a thing that I would ask them, right? I'm going to call the for sale by owner. I'm going to say, hey, I'm looking to be compensated as a buyer's agent, and my buyer client is interested in your home. Would you be willing to compensate me X%, Y%, something like that? So you have to understand that it's always negotiable. We would ask to be paid, yes. Of course, if the seller's not willing to pay them, we may ask the buyer for it. So let me go back to the thing I just explained a few moments ago. Seller subagency, folks. Seller subagency can happen in multiple different ways. So let me go back to that previous example I had. Let me go back to ABC Realty, who only works with sellers. I've got a listing at 123 Main Street. And let's say that Chelsea also works for ABC Realty. And so Chelsea, let's say, is at the office and she's doing what we call desk duty. If you're not familiar with this, desk duty is where you sit at the office and you answer the phones. And if leads come in, they are typically yours, right? It's a way to generate leads by answering the phones at the office. And they basically get, secretaries by doing this. And so Chelsea is doing desk duty on a fateful day at ABC Realty's office. And she gets a phone call. And let's just make it easy. I'll pick on Cheyenne again. She gets a phone call from Cheyenne. And Cheyenne says, well, I want to see 123 Main Street, which is my listing. Do you think Chelsea is going to take Cheyenne to go see 123 Main Street?
No.
Sure she is. Sure she is. Now, here's the $1 million question. Who does Cheyenne work for? I'm sorry, who does Chelsea work for? Let me rephrase that. I'm like, there was so much silence, I could feel y'all just staring at me, even though I wasn't looking at y'all. I'm like,
My damn self.
yeah, there you go. Whoever I want to. Seth, who does Chelsea work for? Sure, the firm. And so ultimately, who does Chelsea work for?
Again, for seller.
The seller. The seller. So understand this, folks. Listen, okay? Yet again, remember how we started this. ABC only works with sellers. And so when Chelsea goes and shows that property to Cheyenne, Cheyenne is still going to be an unrepresented buyer, just like she was when I showed it. And this is what we call seller. This is more specifically in-house seller sub-agency. Because at the end of the day, Chelsea is loyal to ABC. I'm loyal to ABC, and ABC is loyal to the seller. Remember what I told you how sub-agency works. Everybody who works for the firm works for the client. Even though Chelsea has never even met the seller. The firm is the agent and Chelsea's part of the firm. And so this is in-house seller sub-agency. Everybody works for the seller. Cheyenne is unrepresented. Let it sink in for a minute. What you got, Janet?
So it's kind of like when I bought my house, the agency that was representing me, it was working for Century 21. And the house that I liked and bought, it was from an agent, well, from a firm that also worked from Century 21.
That would be dual agency, which is not the same thing, because did you have representation?
Yes.
Then this is not that. Because right here, Cheyenne has no representation. Nobody gives a crap about Cheyenne. You understand the difference?
Okay.
Yeah. Hang tight. We're going to get there. Baby steps. Because I can see the confusion on your some faces. We're going to get there. What you got, Donna?
So I have my baby steps are very small on this one.
Yep.
I'm not connecting the dots between the agency and the sub-agency. If Chelsea is working for ABC, which is a seller's agency, then why would she show the home to Cheyenne? As Cheyenne is
Because let's say it again. What is your job when you're representing a seller? To sell the property. Can you imagine me saying, I've got some really good crap that you want to buy, Donna? No, you can't see it. Just tell me if you want to buy it, right? Are you ever going to buy anything if I don't show it to you? All right? We're in the act of selling. We're trying to find a buyer, and how worthless would we be if we're not willing to show the home to a potential buyer? We're not assisting Cheyenne, right? Let me rephrase that. We're not working for Cheyenne. We're showing it to Cheyenne to help our seller, because if Cheyenne says, I want to buy this, then we've done our job, right? But we would clearly tell Cheyenne, we don't represent you. You're unrepresented. What you want to do is up to you, but we're going to show you the house because it behooves our seller. Remember, there is a difference between working with and assisting somebody and working for somebody. Who does Chelsea work for? ABC Realty. Who does Seth work for? ABC Realty. Who does ABC Realty work for? The seller. Cheyenne is on her own. She's screwed with a capital S. Ain't nobody looking after Cheyenne but Cheyenne. And that's how she wants it. You heard her say it. I work for myself. That's what she said.
Okay. So tell me again, who is the sub-agent in this?
Technically, both me and Chelsea are sub-agents. Because who is the agent? ABC Realty. And every person who's affiliated with ABC Realty is a sub-agent of ABC Realty. If every single one of you in this room, except for Cheyenne, was also affiliated with ABC Realty, every single one of you is technically a seller sub-agent. Even though you've never met the seller, you're loyal to the seller by proxy because you are an extension of ABC Realty. Does that make sense? Bree, I basically did what you asked me to do in that. Did that? Okay.
Yes, I was gonna say that helped out a lot. Thank you.
Yeah. So let me change it up a little bit, folks, with something that may seem a little more familiar. Okay, let me take Chelsea. Now let's leave Chelsea. Let me take Cheyenne out of the equation. I don't know why I picked 2 C names. That was my fault. At least I didn't pick both Brees. That would have been real confusing. Okay, it was already bad enough. Or both Ashleys. That also would have been problematic. Let me take this a step further. Folks, you ever heard of an open house? Sure you have. Okay. That's my listing as per usual. And Chelsea is holding an open house at 123 Main Street this weekend. And 40 different buyers come in and talk to Chelsea at that open house. Bar none, where are Chelsea's loyalties while she's talking to all those buyers? The seller. Because our firm doesn't work, number one, with buyers in this example to make it a little bit easier. But even if we did work with buyers, she would start off with having a relationship with the seller as a seller subagent, an in-house seller subagent, but a seller subagent. Because I'm telling you, every affiliated licensee of the firm is loyal to the client of the firm. We're extensions. Everybody still okay? Right here, right now. Everybody okay? Ish. I'll take ish. Okay-ish. Okay. Well, let me explain something that's a little more confusing. And that is called cooperating seller subagency. So let's say now I work for ABC Realty. I have this listing, right? I'm a listing agent. It's technically seller subagent from ABC Realty. 123 Main Street yet again. And let's say that there is an agent affiliated with XYZ Realty. Let me pick on somebody else. Bill works for XYZ Realty. And I want you to imagine that Janet calls Bill and wants to see 123 Main Street. My listing. We're going to get into it in great detail in just a second, but there's a couple options here. Of course, Bill could potentially represent Janet as her buyer's agent if she wanted that. But there's also this thing where sometimes Janet may not want a buyer's agent because just like the attorney thing, you don't have to have one. And so, do you think that if Bill and Janet had a discussion and Janet said, well, Bill, I don't want to hire you as my agent. Do you think Bill could still show her my listing? Very important thing, though, that I've stated earlier. I'm going to reiterate it. In North Carolina, you have to have a person. So if Janet is not his person, who is the only other person he could have? The seller. Folks, could this happen? Yes, if me and the seller allowed it. This is called cooperating seller subagency. When 2 different brokerages cooperate together, it's called cooperating brokerage. And this would be cooperating seller subagency. So if I gave Bill permission, even though he's from a different brokerage firm, he could join my team as a seller subagent. This is what, y'all stop worrying about the damn money. It's not about the money. Jesus Christ, nobody cares, okay? That's never going to be a test question. Focus on what I'm teaching you, not the money. You will get paid. It's a thing, I promise. But don't focus on the money. If I give Bill permission, Bill can join my team. And I told you this is where it all started, right? It used to be that even when there was multiple brokerages back in the day, everybody worked for the seller because buyer agency wasn't a thing. And it's still a thing today. We just have to disclose it. So Bill would tell Janet, you understand you're not hiring me. I don't work for you. I don't care about you. Janet says, yeah, that's fine. Just show me the pretty house. And so now if Bill is showing Janet the house, even though he's a different firm, who is he loyal to? The seller, my seller. Folks, has Bill ever met my seller? No, but it doesn't change a thing. His loyalties are to the same person my loyalties are to. This is cooperating seller sub-agency. Understand, seller sub-agency can happen in-house, showed you that example, and it can happen cooperating, two brokerage firms. Now, the reason it's not exceptionally common anymore for this way to happen is because of this thing that you see at the bottom of my slide called vicarious liability. Folks, do I know anything about Bill's skill set or training? Nope. So isn't there a chance that when I agree that we can work on the same team, that Bill may screw up and either hurt the customer and or hurt my client? It's possible. And if we've agreed to work on the same team, I could maintain a level of what we call vicarious liability, where he gets in trouble, but because we're on the same team, I could also be considered in trouble. Now, Cheyenne put in the chat, is Bill a selling agent in this scenario? Yes, he is, because he brought the buyer, but his loyalties are not to the buyer. That's why I told you selling is a dangerous word. And so in a test question, we would say Bill is the selling agent assisting Janet, a buyer customer. And right then, right there, you know we're dealing with seller sub-agency. And you know Bill is loyal to whom? The seller. You see how this works. Now, folks, let me show you something really quick. Go ahead, Donna, while I pull this up.
And in that case, would Bill need to sign a listing agreement?
No.
With Janet?
No, that's a very good question. This is a very weird thing because I told you every single agency contract has to be in writing with the exception of oral buyer agency agreements. Well, the thing is, technically speaking, Bill is not going to have a listing agreement. Why? Because I have one, and on mine, I gave permission for somebody to join my team. His authority comes from my listing agreement, and you will see that later tonight.
Okay.
So there is a listing agreement in place. It's just, he's not going to have it. It's mine stating that he can be on my team. But technically, there is one in place. What you got, Bree?
So, and this made me think in 2D, is this between ABC and XYZ now, or is it just set to Bill?
Well, I guess I'm trying to understand, like, to what extent is your question? Because at the end of the day, ABC and XYZ are both getting paid. ABC and XYZ both care about the seller. Janet's on her own. Like, I don't,
Right. So Janet wouldn't be able to be represented by someone else in XYZ because Bill represents XYZ.
Yeah, and she said that she didn't want representation. That's the key takeaway, right? She said, I don't want a person. She could have had Bill as her agent, but for some reason, she said, I don't need a person. Kind of like, you know, Cheyenne, right? I work for myself, right? Whatever. Yeah, she elected not to have it. And that is her prerogative, right? Just like when we talked about the attorney example.